Good morning for those of you joining us online. We will be starting in a couple of minutes. We'll just let people trickle in for another minute or two, and then we will get started. Thank you very much. Very well. I think we will get started now. We'll move to a view of the wonderful people who are joining us today. Good morning, good afternoon. I know you are joining us from multiple zones around the world, so thank you for being there today. This is the fourth and for now at least last webinar as part of our series on technologies in humanitarian settings. The driver for this series of webinars on technologies in humanitarian settings was very much along the realization that the agenda around localization, around decolonization of humanitarian assistance, about engagement and putting people at the center of humanitarian action was largely disconnected from another transformative agenda around technology. And that while there is a lot of work and discussion around local technologies and emphasis, the reality is that the digital transformation of humanitarian action has been largely top-down, driven by our adoption and promotion of international technologies. And so we really wanted to work on minding that gap and working on the digital divide that we saw as a growing issue. We saw, for example, increasingly complex tools being used, but the skills not necessarily following up, and the digital literacy, for example, not necessarily being at the level that is required for the responsible use of technologies. So I'll make this short, but a number of these diagnostics led us to conduct a series of case studies that focused on engagement with local communities and participation in the deployment, development, analysis, evaluation of technologies. We looked specifically at the inclusion of women in those processes. We looked at how donors and other actors, international NGOs and agencies could help better support local innovation. And today we will be looking at partnership. We'll be looking at how can we move away from implementing partnership, from a contractual relation towards delivering specific intervention, towards really more equal partnership and collaboration towards the digital transformation of humanitarian assistance. So I will stop here because the experts are in the room, and I'm merely here to do this in brief introduction of the different speakers and facilitate the discussion. For those of you online, please feel free and actually strongly encourage you to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen so that you can ask questions that we will try to relate to the speakers. Let me also thank the Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance at USAID, who has supported this effort to better understand and draw lessons learned on how to bridge this digital divide and how to improve engagement in digital transformation of humanitarian action. So without further ado, let me very briefly introduce the speakers today and the case studies. So we will be hearing from Jesus Melendez, who is a well-known humanitarian seasoned data and digital technology advisor across many agencies. He has experience in well-established corporation, social impact startups, multilateral and international NGOs like Mercy Corps and IREX. He has worked around the globe in Europe, Middle East, Asia, I mean, pretty much everywhere you can think of a disaster he has been working on. And he's really focused, and that's why we worked with Jesus in these issues on finding responsible and ethical ways of closing the digital divide, advancing principles for digital development and other best practices. So thank you, Jesus, for being with us. I will briefly introduce every speaker and then hand over the floor to you. I do want to mention that we're also joined by Sofia Sebastians, who many of you heard from in a previous seminar. Sofia co-authored this case study, which is forthcoming on partnership in digital transformation. We're also joined by Paul Argil, who is a humanitarian entrepreneur, systems builder, someone who has really invested over the last almost 2 decades, not quite, so I don't want to make you older than you are, on working through the use of innovation and technology, working with startups, private companies, nonprofit organizations, really on transformative change, and hence the relevance of her intervention today on the use of innovative approach to scale in humanitarian action. So her work has been published in Forbes, Guardian, so an important commenter on these issues. Let me also introduce Sudhanshu Singh. He is an Indian humanitarian and development professional who has been very much at the center of many of the transformation agenda that I was mentioning earlier, whether it's the Agenda for Humanity, the Grand Bargain, the Charter for Change. He's a member of the steering group for the World Humanitarian Action Forum and one of the founder and international coordinator of Alliance for Empowering Partnership. When he has time, beyond all these activities, he's pretty much response, and he's involved in managing response to almost all major disasters in the Asian Pacific region between 2001 and 2015. So a wealth of experience and knowledge. Thank you, Sudhanshu, for being with us. And last but not least, we're joined by Utsav Karel, who is the lead at Nepal Innovation Lab. He's the Nepal Innovation Lab is an innovation arm of World Vision International, Nepal. Utsav and his team have been really working on scaling up and working with cutting-edge technologies and tools to implement in the field. He formerly worked with a management consulting firm, providing technical services to his clients that included government agencies, private sectors, and NGOs. So again, an interesting perspective from multiple sectors. He has worked with World Vision in the capacity of strategy and ERM specialist. He's from Nepal and pursued a university education from Oxford as well. So thank you, Utsav, for joining us today as well. Again, a pretty diverse and wealth of expertise and experience. That said, I do want to caveat that all comments made today are solely in the name of those who are making those comments, and they are not necessarily representing the views of their organization, nor the views of Harvard or USCIT. But that said, we hope we have a very open and frank discussion, and I'll now leave the floor over to you, Jesus, for presenting and discussing the main finding of the case study, and then we'll have that discussion. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick, and thank you for acknowledging Sofia, because she's truly been a driving force in this case study as well, and it's really the result of both of us, thinking and collaborating, and obviously thank you to you and the whole team at HHI, and thank you to these panelists and to the many others that have contributed to through many interviews. Contributing to this particular case study. That plus some 250 articles, publications, studies, some of which we are still in the process of reading. It's been a fascinating journey and learning. One thing that I wanted to highlight, I don't know if you did, Patrick, but when we talk about balanced partnerships, the issue of balanced partnerships is very well known. Is very well known from well before the World Humanitarian Summit. You know, the principles of partnership were established in 2007, and in 2011, as an example, an organization called Keystone Accountability was already developing surveys to benchmark how local and national actors perceive the relationship with international actors, the likes of Save the Children, Oxfam, CRS, and many others. So that is a very well-known issue. We are focusing, however, when we talk about local actors here, on national and local NGOs that are not linked whatsoever with any international organization. We use the definitions from the localization marker. It's a document that was put together by a group of the Interagency Standing Committee to try to identify and to track actually funding directed to these organizations. The document has some challenges, and I think Sudhanshu can talk about that in the way it was redefined. But our main focus here is international NGOs today and those local and national NGOs that are collaborating with them in the implementation of humanitarian programs. That said, of course, there are many other actors that are involved in technology activities in the humanitarian response. And also highlighting that when we look at digitalization or of humanitarian response, this was something that, you know, throughout this process, we've been thinking, I mean, what aspect of digitalization? Are we looking at the sort of the IT components of organization? We're looking at digital programming. Originally it was digital programming, and I think that remains the main focus of the study. But I think as we've been learning, as we've been talking to organizations and individuals, it is clear that we must see digitalization, we must see the full spectrum of digitalization. And I call that sort of digital transformation or modernization of business process and operational systems, including IT, anything from websites to how organizations host data and manage data internally, human resources systems, etc. Also, how programs are being improved through digitalization, both from an efficiency and from an effectiveness and quality perspective. So from collecting data to using technologies that help us to achieve certain outcomes that are expected in humanitarian activities. And last but not least, how are we innovating? You know, what is the role of digital enabled innovation, which is a component, this R&D, if you like, research and development part of an organization that many international organizations have the luxury of having to some degree. You know, they have people with titles that are innovators, and I think Utsav, you can talk about that. But many local and national organizations do not have the luxury. In fact, if they are lucky, they will have an IT officer that is playing every role that you can imagine around the digitalization spectrum, from being the innovator to being the data officer to be the digital program expert, etc., etc. So that's something important to keep in mind. Last thing before I go into some of the key findings across several dimensions, the one thing that I found myself, you know, when looking at this concept of localization that I must admit I knew a little bit about, but not to the degree that I know these days, is that the way localization was defined in the Grand Bargain, which is one of several initiatives that came out of the World Humanitarian Summit. There are many other relevant to this discussion, the Charter for Change, in fact, GAHI, that sort of global innovation initiative that failed. But the Grand Bargain truly elevated the idea of balanced partnerships. And it did it through work stream number 2, which a lot of people would think about it from the perspective of funding. That sort of famous 25% of funding goes to national and local actors. But in reality, that work stream was also about supporting and enhancing or strengthening the institutional capacity of local actors. It's not just about capacity building. It was described as a capacity sharing exercise and really working together, learning from each other to advance each other's capabilities so that we can create more balanced partnerships. And on top of that, of course, sharing the power in the sense of funding. But at the same time, the Grand Bargain has several other work streams that I think have contributed to the divide that we're seeing today with regards to how digitalization plays a role in international and local actors. So work streams, for instance, like number 4 and number 9. Number 4 was about cost management, and number 4 was about reporting. When you look at international organizations' self-reports from the Grand Bargain, they use those two work streams as examples of digitalization, but they do not have any single example of digitalization when it comes to work stream number 2, meaning that they are implementing digitalization to support those commitments, but they are not doing the same with the local partners. And I think this is one interesting example and finding, which is how commitments to localization are indeed, in my opinion, creating a new type of digital divide between international actors and local actors. Of course, that said, there are initiatives that are trying to change that. When it comes to key findings, the exercise was divided in various dimensions. Technology was obviously one of the dimensions. I would say technology and data-driven approaches, because the two go hand in hand these days. There was a people component, there was a policies, principles, and a standard component. There was the partnerships component itself. And then we wanted to kind of look at things through the perspective of the context created by COVID-19. When we look at technology, there is obviously a general consensus among all actors that technology can indeed help, if done responsibly and ethically. It can help with effectiveness, it can help with efficiencies, with quality. It can actually help us, and these were comments from some local actors, deploy closer relationships with communities themselves. So there is that general consensus. Now, when you look at some of the reports that are out there in terms of the degree of digitalization in the humanitarian sector, if you look at the examples of NetHope has a tool called the Non-Profit Digital Ability Assessment Tool. The majority of the organizations are transforming themselves digitally, but they feel ready to do so, but they're lacking the processes and the policies to make this a sort of a reality. NetHope primarily talks about international actors, which is their membership, not local actors. But there is an organization in West Africa called WAXI that works with civil society across Africa. Among that civil society, there are many humanitarian actors, and they've been very, very involved in localization discussions and balanced partnerships. For instance, they support this Reimagine, the international NGO project organized by Rights Collab. And they have produced a report on digital transformation, which I think is a good proxy indicator. And reality is local and national organizations care about the exact same things. They care about using data to be more operationally more efficient. And two concerns are completely shared between international and local organizations, and that is data management practices. How to be better, leveraging digital at securing data, managing data, and acknowledging that data can do good, but it can also do a lot of harm if it falls in the wrong practices. And that data and information are key to make sure that we are all accountable to affected populations, something that both international and local actors truly believe is at the center of really building more equitable and balanced and quality partnerships. At the end of the day, is the affected populations that we have to keep in at the center of these discussions. There hasn't been a focus in this study on particular set of technologies, but having said that, obviously, as we look at the spectrum of technologies that are being used in the humanitarian sector, there are certain domain areas of application, I would say, where there's been more advancements and there is more purpose put into understanding what partnerships, what good quality partnerships should be about. An example of that is the cash and voucher assistance, for instance, and this has really been driven by groups of experts networks, such as CALP, for instance, that has really been convening actors, both local and national and international, around best practices, and has been truly and purposely integrating this idea of balanced partnerships, both from the perspective of localization, but also from the perspective and acknowledging that cash and voucher assistance can become more efficient, more effective with the responsible use of certain digital technologies, whether it's for case management practices, whether it's for cash transfer themselves, or in some cases even digital identification. So on the other hand, you have examples such as technologies that have been used for things like crisis analysis, for instance, or humanitarian access or humanitarian context analysis. This is something that I'm sure Sudhanshu will be talking about, because it came across in his interview. You know, a lot of international players, often with support from private sector, some private sector that are very well known and that have had a lot of issues, the likes of Palantir, if you allow me to say, but also other international actors, the Microsofts of this world, the AWS of this world. They've been supporting and sponsoring the creation of crisis technologies or crisis analysis technologies, predictive analytic models, really leapfrogging some of the abilities and capabilities of international organizations with regards to this type of analysis, when at the same time local and national organizations basically have very little capacity to do so, with the exception of some. And I think HAI in India is an example of it, but nobody's listening to them and nobody's taking into consideration the approaches that they are putting into practice with regards to the use of these technologies for this type of analysis. I will, I'm conscious of time, so I'm gonna go straight to policies and principles and standards, because I think that's been one of the key findings. Especially in the area of responsible data practices, which is, like I said before, an area of common concern and an area where both local and international actors believe digital can be useful, but it also can do a lot of harm. International actors have put together over the years, I think probably the first one to do so in responsible data was Oxfam. I think Oxfam sort of led the way in terms of developing responsible data practices. And then many others have followed. The last of which, or I don't know if the last, but certainly one of the last was Mercy Corp, who published, I think, already 3 years ago now, but he said even this year, some really good guides in several languages on how to do responsible data well. All of these guides are publicly available. All of these guides, according to the policies of the international organizations, are there for local and national actors to benefit from. But there is a lack of evidence of how this is actually happening. How are we putting these policies and plans and guidelines to practice, not only among ourselves, not only with our country offices, but with our partners, and doing it not only on a program by program basis, but how are we doing it holistically with a landscape of or ecosystem of partners that we have? Why do we have to wait for a program to tell us that we need to support a local actor in integrating these policies and put them to practice? Why are we waiting for the program to tell us, or for the donor to tell us? Why are we not doing it systematically? That's something that is not been seen. And maybe the last thing that I would say, and after, if you know, Patrick, we can go into key considerations as when we open the floor to the other panelists. But one of the things that I would say, and for me, this is really one of the key findings personally, I was hoping to find more evidence of how ICT programming, whether it's on an innovation basis or more program data collection, evaluations basically of how this is happening, and evaluations that would take into consideration the partnership component. We know what equal and balanced and complementary partnerships should look like. There are plenty of frameworks out there, from the near performance framework to the GMI quality of partnerships dimensions framework. There is even tools that help us measure the powerness of partnerships between international and local actors. There's one called Power Awareness Tool that I was talking about last week with a colleague of mine, Linda Raftree. Nobody is using any of these frameworks, any of these definitions to measure how partnerships are being affected by digital technology, whether it's when we are innovating, when we are transforming digitally, or when we are doing as simple but common things in our sector as data collection. Nobody is evaluating this, and if they are, they're not making it public, which I think is a huge barrier for us to make progress in this very important topic. Over to you, Patrick.
Thank you very much for these insightful and perhaps provocative findings, but I think that's really helpful to get us started on the discussion. So I'll hand over to you, Paula, and maybe have your reaction on these findings and insight from your own experience working in this field.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Patrick, and thank you for having me here. And I want to say that what I am going to bring today comes from having been in around the sector for, yes, almost 2 decades, like you were saying, but also from like the last 2 years. So last year I was based in Mali, and now I'm based in Myanmar. And it looks very different when you're thinking about humanitarian assistance and digital when you're sitting in Geneva, right, or in London and thinking about this like very exciting topics than when you're actually like in reality trying to make it work. So I think for me, it's really interesting that we're having this conversation because my main sort of hope would be that we take this as an opportunity to not replicate like the colonial structures of the aid sector. And unfortunately, I don't necessarily see my hope coming to fruition. I see the opposite. So humanitarian ICT fans are obsessed with 2 things, right? They're obsessed with the design and the ownership and the intellectual property, and they're obsessed with the ownership of data. So what I see more and more is humanitarian organizations that use the flag of partnership to actually approach local organizations and you know, transfer these obsessions. So instead of arriving and having a conversation about how can digital make our work more efficient and more effective, they arrive and they say, hey guys, we've built this amazing asset in London or Oslo or whatever, and we would like to train you to use it, right? Or they arrive and they say, hey, we have purchased this amazing product to do cash programming more efficiently, and we're going to train you how to use it, and then we're never even going to tell you the data that we're collecting in our head office and what we're doing with that data to go and win the next grant. So my first hope would be, can we please see it and stop doing it? And then I guess the second reflection I want to share now is from the point of view of the local organizations that I currently advise and work with, and to really bring to the forefront that being able to use technology for humanitarian assistance is a game changer. If for years we have been waiting for finding the right policy framework or the right solution so that local organizations can be in the same level playing field, I have to say, no need to look for more policies, no tools are needed. All we need is the internet and all the beauty that the internet brings with all of the no-code tools that are available. So right now, you can be a small local organization working anywhere in the world, and you can have access to building the same tools that keep in business the biggest humanitarian organizations out there. So for me, this is one of the things that I am hoping we will put more value and attention in, and stop talking about, well, local organizations have no capacity, local organizations have no funding. Actually, what this provides is an opportunity for local organizations to show their unique value. Because when you stop competing on back office and your ability to produce asset, and you start competing on your ability to understand people, to reach them, and then you realize that all of those back office, actually, you can just download something and use it, perhaps even for free, then we're gonna start to see like a real change in the humanitarian sector. And those are the 2 things that really, really excite me about this case study. So looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much for these very, very important points. And maybe before we engage, and think many people want to respond and discuss this, but before we do that, let me hand over to Sudhanshu, please.
And thank you very much. And Let me start with a few points referred by Jesus. And the first one was localization marker working group. Let me start from there. And the very name says that the group's task was creating a localization marker to track the progress on localization. But if you see the definitions paper, it didn't come up with a localization marker. Rather, it came up with a definition of local and national actors. No, who the local and national actors are and what does it mean as directly as possible. And that means clear politics. No, a localization marker based on technology would have helped all of us to track the exact progress being made on the localization commitments. But that was changed. The very mandate was changed, and rather it ended up developing a definitions of local and national actors, and that was also sabotaged. If you see in the same paper, there's a footnote in the ISA definitions paper, and that kills the definition of local and national actors. So that's one thing. Second, regarding data, the grand bargain itself talks about in the very first stream, greater transparency, where it talks about data, publishing data on EIT dashboard. No, but 6 years down the line, where rather we are the 7th year, there is hardly adequate data on EIT dashboard, and now we don't talk about it. And perhaps because many of us are uncomfortable with bringing data in public domain, because data in public domain means transparency, and transparency means we becoming more accountable and answerable. And if we want to avoid that, we'll be very selective and careful of not putting up the information, bringing information in public domain. Jesus also talked about this about reducing management cost, another work stream of grand bargain, which largely talks about technological advancement to transform the way humanitarian actors have been working. But that has been dropped, and now not much has been done on that. Having said that, I largely agree with Paula that technological advancement have been helping local actors, and now you need internet that solves many problems, not all the problems. In my personal opinion, and I'm a national actor in India, over the last few years, technology has made life and partnership also easier. Now, you need, instead of physical verification, internet may take care of due diligence, and you need a good internet connection to have a meeting with your donor, and then you qualify and use you start you enter into partnership. It is very inclusive also, because earlier, if you had to participate in a coordination meeting, local actors were particularly expected to travel from periphery to capital cities. That required a lot of time and money, which they didn't have. Now, anywhere sitting, they can just connect and be part of national or global meetings. So that's very helpful, but that's not enough. Only having internet connection doesn't solve the problem if you are not on level playing field, and we are not as national and local actors. We are not. Even if we have internet connection, we need someone to write content. Do we have that? We don't, because we are not getting regular overhead cost. Institutionally, we are getting weaker because most of us don't have multi-year funding. Our projects do not have enough operation and overhead cost. So we have to wear many hats. Someone from within our organization should know how to manage internet, how to come up with social media profiles, and the knack of writing powerful content, which we lack. And even if we come up with social media handles with a few followers, do we make any footprint? We don't. We can't compete with INGOs having millions of followers, no, where they have professional content writer. So this is the digital divide. There is technological advancement, but by and large, big agencies have invested on their technological, not for programming largely, but to enhance their own branding and portfolio to capture the imagination of their audience for fundraising. We in India are trying to use a lot artificial intelligence, machine learning, drones, satellite imagery, because we think that disasters are so complex. We need to bring in technology to understand the underlying causes and complexity of disasters. So we use drones. We have a drone for humanity platform. but we don't find enough appetite among donors, particularly INGOs, to invest on that, so that and simplify this technology, so that we can we can become efficient on assessment and analysis to come up with interventions which seek long-term solutions. There is not enough. So I still feel that this technology is actually widening the divide. Local actors are losing for the international actors are gaining more. I stop here.
Thank you so much for those points. Without further ado, let's have your comments, please. And again, thank you for joining us at a rather late time for you.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you all the fellow panelists as well. I think we are having really great discussion, and I completely agree with Paula as well as Sudhanshu when we talk about yes, we really want to decolonize the whole aid industry, and that's why we are talking quite a lot around localization, right? And of course, then when we look from the practicality point of view, then like there are big companies always thinking about like data and all these kind of like coming up with the technology and then trying to like basically put that technology in the community, whether they need it or not. So based on our experience, like what we feel is that in order to make sure there's a right localization, it's all about value co-creation, right? Like it's all like the people coming together and trying to do things. I was like, we might invest millions and millions of dollars, right? Come up with like really amazing technology, let's say blockchain or AI or all the fancy technologies. But the problem there is how the process started itself. Like, did we really engage the people? Like, do we really empathize? Do we really try to think from their perspective? For us, like someone who has been looking after innovation in some of the South Asian settings, what we felt is like we failed from the process because we thought sometime, like sitting in a fancy chair, oh, this is blockchain, this is going to really make a difference because it's all about transparency, data security. But like we speak a very different language to the people, if we compare with different stakeholders, right? Like sometimes we talk like a software engineers and nerds, and like people don't understand what we are talking about. So I think like for us, from different failures we went through, and like at first, like we didn't really had an appetite to fail, right? But now, like we also do things like fail fast, and we are very loud and proud about failing and learning from the process. So I think like the most important thing what we have experienced in over the last 7 years is about like how we co-create with the community, because that really helps to manage the risk. That really helps to localize different systems or processes as well. And finally, this also gives ownership and the sustainability of the systems or anything we develop. We talk about the technology or non-technological bits as well. So when we are talking about partnership, when we are talking about localization, I think like the co-creation bit is really, really important because it's also about appreciating the differences. It is difficult, I definitely get it, but at the same time, we have to do that. And I think like we have been doing for quite a long time as well. And I think keeping it simple as well, because sometimes we are so carried away by all these like cool ideas or technologies. So like for us, I think like one of the philosophy has been, like you create something which is so simple, even your grandmother understands it, right? So, and we have to articulate that as well. So I think like keeping it simple and co-creating together is really, really important if we really want to use the technology and go for the localization. I'm just stopping here. I'm sure like there is going to be more interesting discussion. More.
Thank you very much. So there were so many points that I'm not sure where to start, so I will actually take some of the comments that were made earlier, and maybe going back a little bit to the case study as well, which will be shared with this audience shortly, and maybe talk a little bit about models of partnership. And I know, Jesus, that you explored a little bit new models around inclusive networks, maybe more local to local partnership to help amplify voices. And maybe focus on advocacy. And do you see that as an emerging trend? What can be done to support and work around these new partnership model?
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. So I mean, I think one of the, and there's been good findings, and I think, and rightly speaking, there is new models for sure, and there are also, you know, good examples of some of the programs that international NGOs are implementing. I said earlier that I haven't seen evidence whatsoever. I mean, there's been some evidence, and you know, even back in 2000 and I think it's 2016, Oxfam published a multi-year report of ICT interventions, and they did mention the partnerships, but it was literally like one paragraph, and the results were, you know, I mean, the evaluation was talking about the exact same thing that we're talking right now. There are new models, yes, but some of those new models that we've seen actually come from brand new or relatively new humanitarian organizations, if you like. We've seen models that are intrinsically, I mean, from the onset of the model, the idea of balanced partnerships have been incorporated, and the idea of be aware of the power that you're creating has been incorporated. This is the case of We Robotics and the model that they have with localization with the flying labs. But not only that, I think what We Robotics has done, and I'm aware, for instance, that an organization that is thinking about this a lot from the perspective of partnerships is Save the Children Sweden, for instance. And we talked to Jeanette from Save the Children Sweden, and they are trying to figure out if the model that We Robotics has implemented is something that could be implemented within their organization, at least in a few programs, and what would that look like. But what We Robotics did is that they actually measure themselves against a framework. They use a framework provided by someone called RB Bagios, which I think is a fantastic framework that talks about levers of partnerships and sort of key dimensions, also known as barriers, you know, resources, agency, and ways of being and respecting those. That exercise of measuring for an organization that has technology and emerging tech at the center of what they do, I think that's what we're missing here. Other organizations and new models, World Central Kitchen. World Central Kitchen, I think the way they are using technology to communicate, it's a very interesting sort of an equitable and complementary way of really not just showing the way that the work they do, but actually the work they do through their local partners. Give Direct is another interesting example. You know, you can distribute cash directly to affected populations with minimum presence in countries, leveraging technology for cash distribution, but also advanced analytical models that are also informed by human intelligence on the ground, not just by satellite imagery, etc., etc. International organizations have done some great things. I think recently Mercy Corp sort of published another report on the resilience hubs in Puerto Rico and the sustainability model that they've developed there with local organizations. Each resilience hub that is powered by Wi-Fi provided by Cisco, that is powered by other forms of technology, solar technology as well, not ICT in this case, has become sustainable thanks to the development of balanced partnerships between Mercy Corp and local grassroots or organizations. So those are some examples. The last one, perhaps, that I would say, and again, one of the technologies, I think Paula was mentioning no code earlier. There are few but very interesting examples. One by UNOCHA on the application of no code technologies in humanitarian response. Definitely something to consider, but also mapping, GIS and mapping solutions. Humanitarian OpenStreetMap is going through a transformation exercise themselves that is also trying to kind of create more balanced relationships with their local chapters. But in some cases, there is evidence that also, you know, opening these technologies, the idea of open source, not only benefits the use of these technologies by the locals, but it actually helps localize the technologies from the perspective of communities. Take that open source core, making it and adapt it to the local contexts. That is another way of also seeing localization success or succeed, sorry. Over to you.
Thank you for this, Jesus. I want to open the floor. I don't know if anyone wants to follow up with comments on these models and what you have seen as positive or less positive lessons learned. I see it's happening. Paula, thank you.
Yes, of course. I think some of the examples that I think are very positive are where you see an INGO, for example, not trying to understand the partnership as an ability to subcontract, but actually a partnership as an ability to co-create and generate value. And I don't know if that's what the majority of the studies that you were quoting refer to as a balanced partnership, but in my experience, the balance doesn't necessarily tend to be actually realized if it's not designed as a venture to generate joint value. And I think there are some examples of INGOs actually realizing that the local organization should not necessarily be assessed in terms of their capacity so that they can then get more capacity to deliver. But they are actually starting to recognize that this whole process of like partnering and assessing capacity is very political, right? It's not a technical exercise. And if you're working in contexts like here in Myanmar or other places in Latin America, the assessment of technical capability should actually be the other way around. As in, like, is your staff able to keep up with the level of technology that the young people in this like community-based organization is able to access? And I think here it's important to make a distinction between local organizations and spontaneous community-based aid. Because if I was going to bet my money, right, if I was a betting woman, I would like to bet in 10 years' time, seeing much more of these community-based spontaneous solidarity organizations led by young people, providing much more humanitarian value than what we consider nowadays as an organization, as in like that you need to have structure, that you need to have a strategy. If we tend to only think of local providers as those that have a strategy, that have a structure, and then we forget that there's a variety of young people in really difficult places, not only living there, but actually trying to help from abroad with a high access to technology and a big spirit for solidarity, then I think we're going to be missing the point in terms of what are the partnerships of the future that we're going to need to provide humanitarian assistance that makes sense in, I would say, 5 to 7 years' time. Yeah, I'll stop.
Thank you for Jesus. Were you going to follow up?
Very, very quickly. To Paula's point, one example that we found and someone that we talked to towards the very end is C10 in Uganda, in North Uganda, and their relationship and the partnership that they formed with UNHCR in particular, based around trust, based around observation, based around not testing with but not experimenting on with communities. But this is a grassroots refugee-led organization that almost happened spontaneously, but over the years it has become an organization that is now truly developing balanced partnerships with some of that. So I said some of these spontaneous ones, if cultivated, if worked with, can actually become, if they want, more structured organizations. But 100% agree with the Paula that we need to pay attention to that.
Thank you for this added precision. Maybe one area that has raised a number of questions and general comments is around this aspect of capacity building, capacity co-creation, partnership. Maybe I can turn towards you, Tsav and Sudhanshu, and really ask you what have you seen as some of the key let's call them needs, but also what have been the effective model of partnership towards the aim of improving capacities, not just of local and national actors, but those working internationally as well. What do you see as necessary, and how can we work around this issue of capacity? Again, not a top-down transfer, but in a partnership approach, and realizing that we all have to learn and need to learn. So what have you seen as effective in that specific area of partnership?
And thank you, and I'll be very happy to answer this. But before that, referring to what Paula and Jesus said, see, of course, we can find scattered good examples, scattered examples of good partnerships, but we should not take that it's a system-wide transformation. And it's particularly, we have to be very careful with the confederations if they're coming up with a good example, whether it is this example is of a specific context or it's a system-wide. Often we'll find that it's just context specific, and there is the problem. Context specific good examples are projected at larger level to show transformation, which is not the case. So by and large, partnership remains a problem. And coming back to this capacity building question, my firm belief is that no single humanitarian actor, however big you are, has the comprehensive capacity, response capacity. So often local actors are accused of not having enough capacity, and therefore they are denied funding. No, and that's why we have been seeing for years and decades discussion on capacity building, but capacity is never built. We are still talking the same. So we have to understand what is capacity here. I by and large categorize capacity into two: response capacity, compliance capacity. Local actors are always good on response because they are locally rooted. They know the context. They are the first, and they have the response capacity. That response capacity is increasingly getting eroded because of this system, which is marginalizing them. Now, most of the local actors have stopped being institutions. We are events manager. Why? Because we don't have a regular inflow of funding. We can't retain core team of staff. We don't have the thinking. Rather, thinking is borrowed from our intermediary partners. No, they tell us, here is the project design, here is the budget, go and implement as it is. So we are no more CSOs, we are events manager, and that capacity has gone because of flawed partnership pattern. And that needs to be fixed by acknowledging that's the local organizations who have the best response capacity. And as an intermediary, you have the capacity of compliance. You should bring in the capacity of technology, and donors should bring in the capacity of funding. I'm very happy to see this latest local action policy document of USAID, which is out for seeking public feedback. And in this document, for the first time, the largest donor has acknowledged that we don't have enough capacity to manage multiple partnerships. And I was very glad to read that. No, and they have, for the first time, planned that they need to work on their own capacity building, which not a single donor did until now, not a single intermediary did until now. All the time they talked about capacity building of local organizations without ensuring that they need regular overhead cost multi-year partnership. They can grow in terms of thinking, their intellectual capacity can go. And I think that's the area where we need to work, not on capacity building for say organizing events, training programs, but system strengthening, providing support to local organizations so that they can become again institutions capable of thinking, capable of leading the process of transformation, not merely being events manager. I think we have to look into in that direction.
Utsav.
Perfect. Completely on board with Sudhanshu, what he was talking about. Like for us as well, like when we think that, like everyone has got the capacity, let's be very honest, right? It's not just some international NGOs having all the capacity to, like solve everything. So I think like one thing we always try to think, I think that's the mindset we have, is we think local partners as suppliers or implementers, rather than, like someone who can really, really bring value in the table. So for us, like I can give you one of the example of what we did, and it was really different process. Like when it's partnership, that is going to be all right, like we'll try to capacitate them and like help them to set up a really great platform, and they are going to make make it more sustainable, let's put it that way. So we started, I think, back in 2018 with USAID and World Bank, something called Kitab Bazaar, or the online book platform. So the whole idea was we wanted to coordinate with the businesses, right? And we'll be developing a platform. They will be delivering books to the community schools, right? It's like a classic Amazon thing, the thing being done in the local level, trying to plug in some of the gaps kind of thing. So community schools could order books online, the publishers or our national level partners would print it and ship it, and they get paid. And we did like a bit of a reward thing in the process. Then what we realized is whenever we went to different kind of meetings, then we talk completely different language. Like they talk about profit, we talk about beneficiary number or target things, right? Like, yeah, like we're doing the same venture, but it was very difficult. And then when it came to the ownership part, what we realized was because of the different power dynamics and different interests, maybe people have the experience, this is a project, this will end, and then we all will have really fancy report and we'll get our job done. But during the process, what we learned is there are so many startups who brings really great technologies in the table, but at the same time, as Sudhanshu mentioned as well, the compliance bit is missing, right? They do not have the credibility of 5 years, great financial statements and so on and so forth. So one of the things what we had to basically look and try to discount from our regular process was around trying to balance, the thing what we are doing and trying to, put the perspective in place as well. So basically what we tried to do was, then we found the startup. They were really excited to take the the project to the next level after the completion of the project. So we have to help them with the business model and so on and so forth. But at the same time, we realized I think they have got more capacity than us. Sometimes we are just learning something from different kind of trainings, but they have got the local capacity, they have got the technical appetite as well, and they also can take the risk. So for us, I think what we nowadays say is everyone has got the capacity. Those partners are not the suppliers or vendors or the implementers. They are actually someone who can really drive and create value and then take it forward. So for every time, I think it's all about the capacity is already there in the room. So it's all about how we bring it together and how we move forward. I think Sudhanshu has got something to add there.
Can I?
Please.
We should use a few indicators to measure the claims being made on good partnership, and a few majority of the local organizations still don't have their own websites. Why? Because they don't have money to afford server cost or domain name renewal every year. They can't have it, and IT manager and content developer to keep website updated. So we should ask intermediaries, have you helped your local partners at least to have a good website? Because that's the first thing you need to tell the world what you are doing about. No? And majority of the local and national organizations don't have that. Majority of the local and national organizations use Gmail. They don't have their own organizations' email addresses also. Microsoft and Google are doing a lot than many big humanitarian agencies, because they provide these services free, but local organizations are not even aware, so they cannot access all these services. So if in a partnership, local organizations do not have even basic things like email, proper official email addresses, a web equitable partnership. It was actually colonial, and it continues being colonial. Over.
These are very important points. I want to open the floor in the last minute to maybe Jesus and Paula to respond to these comments if you have any response. and then we'll unfortunately have to close the discussion. We're reaching the hour. It's been fascinating. Before I hand over the floor, I just want to also acknowledge both Luciana and Saira, who have helped put this seminar together, and Saira, who has done tremendous work in getting those case studies together. So Jesus, Paula, I think Sudhanshu, I know I see your hand still up, but I think maybe it was the previous comment, but the floor is open for the final comments for everyone. And then we'll unfortunately have to end this, and next time we will plan for 2 or 3 hours of discussion. Thank you very much. Floor is yours. Maybe Jesus, we can start. Oh, Paula, sorry.
Yeah, so I'll just maybe finish with a quick soundbite. And the problem of localization is a problem of back office, right? It's about being able to show that you can have the same levels of accountability. That is a problem of back office. And it's a problem that is solvable through technology. So if you're a local organization, work with partners that want to invest in your back office. If you're an international organization, stop pretending to be building capacity to deliver and build capacity to compete. And the way you build capacity to compete is not by transferring your products, it's by building their products to serve for back office. I'll stop with that.
And I think I would almost describe that. I think we're talking about strengthening capacity, building capacity. One key word that keep coming was the sharing of capacity. I think that's fundamental for balanced partnerships. But one thing I would say is, even this week, so last week, the Pledge for Change was announced. There was a lot of focus on equitable partnerships and a couple of other pledges, but there was no integration of what digital is doing into all of this. I think this week we have the Ringo Festival happening, talking about risk management, accountability, talking about compliance issues. No mention of how digital is and innovation in general is affecting all of this. And this week, the Frontier Digital Development Forum is happening here in Washington, DC. We're talking about Web3 and partnerships with private sector and international organizations. We're still running 2 processes in parallel, and this needs to finish until those focus and care about partnerships and shifting the power and sharing the power, and those that are rightly interested in leveraging technology innovation start talking to each other. I do not think that we will make substantial progress. On top of that, focus on the smaller things. If cybersecurity is an issue that everyone is concerned about, focus on making gains on that. If it's internet and reliable internet and the back office services that come with that, just focus on that. But make progress on smaller things before you start focusing on the shiny objects, I would say. Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you for that very clear diagnostic that in many ways is the one that started this discussion, and it is frightening that we still are there, but I think that Sudhanshu and all of you have given a very, very clear, provoking, but a very important pathway for the future. So thank you all for your participation today. I look forward to staying engaged and sharing the case study with you all, and appreciate your participation today. For everyone, this video will be made available online. We will share it with you, and once the draft of the case study is ready for comments, we will circulate it publicly so that it becomes well, let's say a co-created document that has all of your input. So thank you very much, and have a good rest of the day. Thank you, everyone.